hope everyone is doing well. So recently I read the Hunger Games trilogy for the first time and I really loved it. I really loved the trilogy, but something that I said at the end of my reading vlog was that I was a little bit burnt out by the world, and so I wasn't planning on reading the prequel anytime soon. I guess I lied because I ended up reading it pretty much like a week after FOMO got to me. I saw so many people talk about it, so I read it and I have some thoughts that I want to discuss with you today about the book. So if you don't know, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is the prequel for the Hunger Games. It is Snow's origin story, President Snow, who is the main villain, the main antagonist in the Hunger Games trilogy. And so the prequel is the story of how he became the villain that we know in the Hunger Games trilogy. So the first thing that I will say about the story that I appreciated is that I really liked how Susan Collins didn't write him a sob story about how he was a good person and really kind, but something happened and that made him evil, because I feel like a lesser writer would have done that. She could have done also something even more lazy, which is to make him a villain because he was born out of a loveless relationship and that's why he's evil, because his parents didn't love each other. I'm not saying any names, but if you know, you know. Yeah, that is a bad villain origin story. So I'm glad that Susan Collins didn't do that. Instead, I feel like his backstory is probably the most realistic in a way of people like him in real life. He was born out of a wealthy and privileged family who lost everything during the war. So he's clearly from a family and an environment that holds fascist ideas, that holds a lot of privilege, ideas that he assimilated from a young age, and so he eventually grew to be even worse because of the classic money and power. Everything always comes back to that. And so we first meet an 18-year-old Coriolanus Snow as he's getting ready for the reaping, since he and his classmates from the capital are gonna be the mentors for the 10th Hunger Games tributes. His family, who was very wealthy and powerful in the capital, lost everything after the war against the rebels, after Coriolanus' dad made some bad investments in District 13, which we know got bombed, and so that made the Snow family lose everything. Because of that, Snow is then determined to win the Plinth prize money, which is promised to the mentor of the tribute that will win the Hunger Games, so that he can bring his family back into its late status. Not only do we see how Snow and his family was deeply affected materially by the war, but we also see throughout the book how he was psychologically affected by the atrocities of the war. He remembers events from the war all throughout the book, one of the most striking being when he and his cousin Tigris see a man in the streets chop off the leg of a woman, the implication being that he will resort to cannibalism because of the food being so scarce. This is obviously a moment that deeply traumatized Snow. It obviously shows the worst point the war got to, but it also shows the extent human beings will go to survive, something that will become relevant as the story goes on and as Snow integrates some philosophies in his life. I will say, seeing the war from the capital side through Snow's memory is a good way to make us understand Snow's deep hatred for the rebels. I think we understand why he feels the way he felt about the rebels, because he actually lived the war and he actually remembers it, and he remembers it at its worst, and that's why he has such a deep resentment for the rebels, because he considers the war being their fault because they're the ones who started the war. He also doesn't question what could have brought them to rebel, because from his and the capital's perspective, everything was perfect before the district started rebelling and declared a war. Because of his own perspective, he doesn't even try to put himself in the district's shoes, obviously. What's interesting is that throughout the story, Snow will actually get the opportunity through characters like Sejanus and Lucy Gray to understand the rebels and to understand why they would rebel, seeing as they are kept subjugated by the capital. And I feel like in a different type of story, that would have made him change his mind and understand the other side, and how his experience in the war is biased because of where he comes from, and without the understanding as to why the other side would rebel against the power in charge and start a war, because when you have nothing to lose, you have nothing to lose, right? If you are kept subjugated and you barely have anything to eat and you barely can live, obviously you have nothing to lose and you're more likely to start a war. But obviously that's something that Snow doesn't consider. And I guess it's kind of the tragedy of his character, is that he gets multiple chances throughout the story to change his mind and to gain new perspective, but he never does. He had plenty of opportunity to become a better person and he just never does. Something that I think Susan Collins particularly excels at, which is shown through this book, is world building. I think she did a really good job going deeper into how something like the Hunger Games could be implemented without people being outraged and without it being shut down immediately, especially considering that it's children who are fighting. And the main way to do that is through dehumanization. Seeing the games through Snow's eyes and other capital people, you see how the districts have been dehumanized in the collective mind. They are not seen as people. There's a lot of racist rhetoric around the district people being almost animal-like, bloodthirsty. Without the Hunger Games, they would kill each other anyway. Especially Snow's grandma, we hear her say that kind of rhetoric a lot about how districts are barely human and how they're bloodthirsty and how you cannot trust them because without the games they would kill each other and that's just the way they are. Obviously that's a lot of fascist ideas, a lot of racist rhetoric. That contributes to the dehumanization of the district people in the capital. And I feel like this is a really good lesson to implement in real life about how we should always be vigilant in real life towards dehumanization of a certain group of people. Once you start seeing a category of people as less than and as barely human, that's when you start dehumanizing them and that's when you start accepting atrocities being committed against them. Because when you see people not as people anymore, it is easier to accept and justify to yourself crimes against humanity and just atrocities generally being committed across them. And that's how things like genocides can happen while the whole world watches and does nothing, and in some cases even cheers for it. So this is definitely something that we should implement in real life, and this is a lesson to take out of this book. To me, it's clear that Susan Collins studied how wars happen and how people get radicalized and commit crimes against humanity, like the whole process behind it, how it can come to be and how it can become as bad as it is without people realizing it and without people acting against it. There is a reason in the story why Sejanus Plinth is the only one as an ex-district to feel sympathy for the tributes and to push back against the system. He sees district's people humanity because he was one. Meanwhile, despite Sejanus' parent status, Snow always makes it clear that Sejanus will never be seen as an equal in the capital. He will always be seen as less than because of his status as an ex-district. There's obviously a hierarchy of people, and if you are not born in the capital, you are automatically less than. And while we're on the subject of Sejanus, Sejanus Plinth is a new student in Coriolanus' class. He's from District 2 originally, but while the war made the Snow more destitute, the opposite happened for Sejanus' family. They became rich through investments and basically bought their way to the capital. The main thing about his character is I feel like on the surface he's kind of your stereotypical humanist character who will stand up for the weak and who cannot stand injustice, and he will do the right thing even to his own detriment. He pretty much acts as a fool for Snow's character because, like I said, while Snow's family lost everything to the war, Plinth's family gained everything. While Snow would have gladly benefited from the war, Sejanus resents it. While Snow is jealous of Sejanus for getting a career tribute in District 2, while he got District 12, which he feels like is a testament to how far the Snow family has fallen, Sejanus abhors the very idea of the games. He feels like a traitor to his own district and can't bear to have the privilege in the capital while the people in his districts are suffering. If Snow's every action is motivated by his own gain, Sejanus is motivated by doing what's right, sometimes to his own detriment, like I said. While Sejanus is honest to a fault, Snow is dishonest and calculating and manipulative. And we see that notably through his relationship with Sejanus. If Snow acts friendly enough from the beginning because of Sejanus' newfound status in the capital, his disdain for him as an ex-district could not be more clear in his internal thoughts. Snow's manipulative tendencies especially shine when he visits Sejanus' family to talk about the Plinth's prize money. He acts very kindly towards both Sejanus' mom and dad, but his internal thoughts betray how he really is and what he really thinks, the contempt he actually has for them. He calls Sejanus' mom pathetic for grasping at memories from her past life in District 2, and when Sejanus' dad doesn't talk about the prize money, Snow calls the visit a waste of time, even though officially he visited to make sure Sejanus was okay. Again, it shows how dishonest and manipulative he is. Throughout the story, his feelings towards Sejanus seem to be pretty ambivalent. He warms up to him eventually, in some ways, but it's clear that he finds his righteousness to be annoying and even foolish. The first time we truly see Snow express only positive feelings towards Sejanus is when he sees him in his group of peacekeepers after he was forced to become one by Highbottom after he cheated in the games to save Lucy Gray. He was essentially exiled from the capital and exiled from his family, and Sejanus represents this only link that he has to his past life and to the capital, and he latches on to that, and that is why he's so happy to see Sejanus. So even in that way, his reasoning for being happy to see Sejanus is still self-serving and doesn't come from his genuine appreciation of Sejanus as a person. But we really only understand the extent to which Snow actually cares about Sejanus after he ironically betrays him and Sejanus gets hanged for treason as a result of it. That's arguably one of the only times that we see Snow feel genuine distress and big emotions for someone other than himself. Granted, it lasted a whopping 2 seconds, but I feel like that's something at least, you know, he showed that he genuinely cared about Sejanus. He cried and he was very obviously emotionally distraught because of what he did to someone that he considered to be his brother, in his own words. In a way, I feel like that event was kind of a turning point for Snow's character, being the reason his best friend died. Could have been his final straw against the capital, but instead he gets rewarded for it by the capital, which essentially leads him to get what he wants, which is to go back to the capital, and leads him to justify that betrayal to himself and to essentially think that Sejanus brought it to himself anyway. Something that I feel like especially highlights the difference between Snow and Sejanus' character and how Sejanus is essentially a foil to Snow is the decision that Snow makes to have the tributes be fed and housed in the capital after the events of the story. Because during the 10th Hunger Games, the tributes were put in a zoo where they were starved and exposed to a bunch of different diseases. They were not being taken care of. And while Sejanus is obviously outraged to see the tributes being starved and at the inhumane conditions that the capital makes the tribute live by because of the fact that it's inhumane, while Snow also recognizes that it's inhumane, he doesn't really care that much except for Lucy Gray because he cares about Lucy Gray as an individual. Again, his care is self-serving, and that is why Sejanus brings food to all the tributes while Snow only feeds Lucy Gray because she's the only one that he actually cares about. And after the events of the story, he implements the rule of the tributes being fed and housed by the capital before the Hunger Games starts, purely because he thought that it was less entertaining for people to see the tributes fight to the death if they were basically barely alive while they were starved, and a lot of them died before the games even began. So obviously he didn't implement that rule because he genuinely cared about the tributes. He did it solely for entertainment purposes, as a way to make the games last even longer so that people would keep watching them. While Sejanus is a character that heavily influences Snow throughout the story, another character that has a lot of influence on Snow is obviously Lucy Gray Baird. So she is his love interest throughout the book. She is District 12 female tribute that Snow has to mentor. She is actually non-native to District 12. She is part of this group of travelers who perform through the districts. But after the war, when the capital won, they were forced to stay in a district and they were assigned to District 12, and that is why they are there. Immediately, she intrigues Snow by her seeming confidence despite the situation that she is in, and also by her charms, which she is described to be this very charming person. I found her to be a bit of a manic pixie dream girl in a way, because we only see her through Snow's perspective. We don't really get to know much about her and her personality, and since the main thing that attracted Snow to her is her mysteriousness, he only really describes her as different and special. It really gave her this manic pixie dream girl quality that I was a little bit thrown off by at the beginning, I can't lie, but I feel like it is very much on purpose because of the fact that we are from Snow's perspective and we only see her through his perspective. And since we see throughout the story that he doesn't actually care to know who she really is beyond what he sees in her, it explains why she's not as much of a fleshed out character as I would have liked to be. What I find most interesting about the romance between Lucy Gray and Snow is that I feel like it's kind of a subversion of your usual trope of prejudiced guy falls in love with someone part of the prejudiced group, and he discovers through her that these people are actually people and they're just like them and they don't deserve to be treated as less than. And it puts him on this path of open-mindedness and acceptance and love. And spoiler alert, that obviously does not happen here in this book. Instead, he very much has this mentality that she's different from the other people in the districts. Instead of realizing through her that people like her are in fact people, because he dehumanized them in his mind, he sees her as the exception. She is not like the other districts. And I think it is also helped by the fact that she is not actually technically districts, because she is from that group of travelers. She is not technically part of District 12, and I think that's also a way that he rationalizes why he feels the way he feels about her. Through his relationship with Lucy Gray, we see how some of the things that were implemented in the games and in the capital in general by Snow, we see how and the reason why they were implemented, which I like to see. For example, we know that Snow prohibited music in the districts, and now we know that it's because of his relationship with Lucy Gray, because through his experience with falling in love with Lucy Gray, he learned that art gives hope to the people, which can lead them to rebel. And he also understood how art humanizes people, and he knows that it's a powerful tool against the capital and against the Hunger Games, and that is why he prohibits it in the districts. It is that much more significant that Snow is originally not someone who is very connected to art and music in general. We know through him that music was something that was very important to his mom, but in that way he is closer to his dad, because we know that because his dad was described as someone who was very cold and unforgiving and not very emotional, so in that sense Snow takes more after his dad. But seeing Lucy Gray perform gives him a new appreciation for music. It humanizes her in his eyes, and that's what led him to have feelings for her in the end, and also what led him to, according to him, lose his ambition and cloud his judgment. So we can see how Snow views art as something dangerous. Similarly, that's why it's decided that the mentors for the tributes of the Hunger Games will not be people from the capital, but all the winners from the district of the tributes, because they want to keep the people from the capital as distanced as possible from the tributes and from the districts, because the more distance there is, the easier it is to dehumanize a group, and the closer you are, the harder it becomes for you to deny their humanity. In the end, the thing about Lucy Gray's character is, like I said, while I understand what we see her through Snow's perspective, I still wanted more from her. We really don't know much about her since we only see her through Snow's perspective, and since he has no way of really knowing much about her before he becomes a peacekeeper and gets reunited with her in District 12, we basically only know the way that she presents herself to the public, which is obviously a shield to protect herself. So we see her as this very confident, charming and jovial person, and since it's her mysteriousness that initially attracted Snow, it doesn't really bother much trying to get to actually know what she's like. It's really only towards the end that we get a glimpse into her real personality and her real opinions, when her and Snow talk about the Hunger Games, for example. During that scene, Snow defends the Hunger Games, while she obviously thinks that the fact that the capital implements it as a rule makes it an inherently flawed system. It's the first time that we see concrete proof of their difference. It's also, interestingly enough, the first time Snow actually voices to someone his genuine opinion about the districts and about the games. Up until now, I feel like he was always kind of apathetic and neutral about the games. He definitely felt like the kind of person who acknowledges its inhumanity, but because it's the rule and it was implemented by the government, he just accepts it. But while up until that point he always seemed fairly neutral around the idea of the games, this is the moment where he takes position, and I feel like it's a very significant moment in his character arc, because he's arguing with Lucy Gray about the immorality of the games, and he responds by saying they lost the war and it's their punishment, talking about the districts and why it's actually fair for the districts to be punished by the Hunger Games, because they lost the war, it's just the way it is. With this scene, we understand Snow's final philosophy choice, but we also understand that Lucy Gray's philosophy is on the same spectrum as Sejanus. They both believe in the inherent goodness of people, they believe in fairness of treatment, and hate the way the capital has been subjugating the districts. Lucy Gray tells him that she believes people were doing well when the capital was in power, and it will still do well when it falls from power. Interestingly, in this scene, she clearly says when and not if, perhaps an innate instinct that someday the district will rebel again against the capital and at this time they will win. Snow had both Sejanus and Lucy Gray as influences in his life with this type of philosophy that's very positive and kind and believes in the goodness weakness of humanity, but it unfortunately wasn't enough to deviate the trajectory of him having assimilated the capital's one. Ultimately, Snow's selfishness and self-servingness and his desire to gain back the power that his family lost after the war is what ends up being essentially the reason for the way everything turns out. If Sejanus and Lucy Gray were big influences on Snow throughout the story, there is another character, a third character, that arguably was the biggest influence on Snow throughout the story, and this character is Dr. Gaul. So Volumnia Gaul is head game maker of the Hunger Games since its creation. She is essentially responsible for the creation of the Hunger Games, as she asked students to create a punishment so severe nobody would dare to rebel against the capital again. She is also a teacher of military theory at the capital and a mad scientist in her spare time. She is what you would commonly call a sadist. She makes weapons for the capital through genetic mutations like snakes and mutts. She is also very enthusiastic about the Hunger Games, although she seems more enthusiastic about people suffering in general, because she, like I said, is a sadist and she just likes seeing people suffer, more so than the fact that it's district children specifically. She has indeed no problem killing one of her own at the capital when they displease her. For example, we have the scene with Clementia when she almost killed her with her mutant snakes because she lied about having participated in Snow's project on how to make the games more entertaining. So she clearly has no trouble killing her own people. Dr. Gaul is a big influence on Snow throughout the story. When Marcus, Sejanus' tribute, tries to escape the games after the bombing, he gets strung up in the arena and was made an example of. Sejanus then goes into the arena to try to retrieve his body because he obviously feels bad about it, because like I said, Sejanus is someone who cannot stand unfairness and injustice and will do what he can to do the right thing, even if it means putting himself in danger. So he goes into the arena to try to retrieve his body. Dr. Gaul then forces Snow to get Sejanus back, and while in the arena, Snow is then forced to kill Bobbin, who tries to kill him first. Later on, Dr. Gaul will admit to Snow that she made him go into the arena as a lesson to him about human nature and how people are inherently violent, and how without control over people, they would behave like in the Hunger Games all the time in real life. She then gives him a special assignment about the value of control. While Snow is at first unsettled by Dr. Gaul and her cruelty, throughout the story he thinks about a lesson on control and slowly starts gaining respect for her and strives for her approval. And ultimately it's this lesson and it's her pessimistic philosophy on human nature that will win over Snow and that will make him go on the path that he goes on. What's interesting about the etymology of both their names is that both Volumnia and Coriolanus are names used in a Shakespeare play called Coriolanus, and Volumnia in this play is actually Coriolanus' mom. And I feel like in a way it kind of reflects the role that Dr. Gaul has for Snow in his story. She takes on kind of a motherly role, but not in a traditional way. She's more someone that guides Snow through the path that he will eventually take on because she sees potential in him. Because I don't think anyone would call this character motherly, but because of her role as a guide for Snow, I feel like there's kind of a parallel there. So in the end, Snow chose to be on the same path as Dr. Gaul because he's someone who was always very ambitious and always strived to get power, and so in a way I feel like it was almost inevitable that he would choose Dr. Gaul over people like Sejanus and Lucy Gray, who represents a more simple way of living, doing what's right and rebelling against the system. In the end, he chooses to be part of the system to get what he wants, which is money and power. You know, while I was studying literature in university, something that I always struggled with in my essays were the transitions. And that's why now, without any transition at all, I will start talking about the negatives, what I didn't like about this book, basically. So, to me, the biggest negative is really how unsatisfying I found the payoff to Snow's character evolution to be. Because I felt like Snow's character was pretty consistent throughout the book, and in the last 10% of the book, he went from a mostly apathetic, selfish guy with ambition to essentially a sociopathic maniac that we see him as in the Hunger Games. And I felt like the transition was not very well done, in my opinion. Because in the end, after having killed District 12's mayor's daughter to protect Sejanus and Lucy Gray, he leaves with Lucy Gray away from the District 12 because Lucy Gray thinks that the mayor suspects her of having killed her daughter, and so she thinks that she will eventually kill her. So she decides to escape and ask Coriolanus to come with her, which he does because he's actually the one who killed the mayor's daughter, and he's scared that it will be found out and that he will then be hanged for murder, essentially. So he decides to leave with her. On the trip, he admits to Lucy Gray that he killed 3 people. Lucy Gray, being only aware of Bobbin and the mayor's daughter, she asks him who the 3rd person is. Snow finds a lame excuse that the 3rd person that he killed was himself, and Lucy Gray obviously doesn't believe him, and so later on she will tell him that she's going out to find some Katniss, which is the last thing that she will say to Snow, that she will say ever probably, which was very heavy-handed, but whatever. And so while she's away, Snow finds the gun he used to kill Mayfair, which is the only thing connecting him to the murder, which is basically his ticket to being back in the Peacekeepers and to be back in the capital. He tries to go find Lucy Gray to tell her that he's leaving and that he's actually not following her, and being unable to find her and only finding his mom's scarf that he gifted to Lucy Gray, he starts sinking into paranoia and is sure that she's trying to kill him when he's bit by a venomous snake, and decides to kill her first. That whole scene was so jarring to me. I feel like instead of a gradual descent into evil and madness, Snow very abruptly descended into paranoia in his last scene with Lucy Gray, where he goes from "I'm gonna find her and explain to her that I'm leaving" to "I have no choice but to kill her because she's trying to kill me, even though she's not there." But he's paranoid and he thinks that she's setting a trap for him, which, to be fair, because of the way that his dad died, because his dad died from booby traps in the District 12 implanted by rebels, he has obviously this innate distrust towards District 12, so it's understandable that he would be paranoid and think that she's trying to kill him. But I still felt like it was a little bit jarring. I was very much what the fuck is going on while I was reading this scene, so I don't really know how to feel about it. This whole scene is obviously the catalyst for Coriolanus to become Snow. We get the first extreme example of Snow's unmounted paranoia, because we know from the Hunger Games that he's a paranoid mad who is scared of everyone taking his place. So this is pretty much the first big hint that we get of that, which again, I feel like it was significant, but at the same time, I would have appreciated it if it was more of a gradual thing rather than this big paranoid moment that we got at the end of the book, instead of something that we gradually see become a thing for Snow. I also think this moment was significant because being bit by the snake, I feel like, is in a way kind of symbolical of the rebirth of Snow. In a way, obviously the snake being representative of himself because he's described as a snake by Katniss all throughout the Hunger Games series, and also because of how abrupt his change seemed to be. I feel like it's appropriate to call it a rebirth because I feel like he became a completely different person after getting bit by this snake. So I choose to believe that it was on purpose and that Susan Collins meant to make it a rebirth, but I still would have appreciated if it was done in another way, like I already said. And I feel like this is even more apparent with his comeback to the Capitol after this scene, because after crying the death of Sejanus 50 pages earlier, we see him come back to the Capitol completely emotionless and cold, while he's basically taking advantage of Sejanus' parents because after Sejanus' death, they decide to essentially adopt Snow and make him become their heir because they have no idea that he's actually responsible for Sejanus' death. And he just accepts it without any traces of guilt or anything like that. He just tells it in a very emotionless, cold manner, which I found very jarring, considering that, like I said, 50 pages earlier, he was ridden with guilt at having betrayed his best friend. So the fact that he just accepts his parents' money and love without any traces of guilt, I just found, again, really jarring. Another thing I was bothered by, but I feel like this one is more nitpicky, but again, about Sejanus' death and Snow's betrayal. The thing is, Snow is a lot of things, but I don't think is stupid. But this scene made him look stupid because I cannot believe that Snow would not even consider the possibility that Sejanus could be executed for treason by snitching on him. Because the thing is, Snow snitched on Sejanus for complotting with the rebels, and he genuinely thought that they were just gonna send him back to the capital to his parents and basically just give him a slap on the wrist and be like, don't talk to the rebels, don't complot against the capital, that's not good. When, like, obviously they were gonna execute him. Like, the fact that it did not even cross his mind is wild to me. Like, how did you not think that you would get executed for it? Knowing how seriously the capital treats treason, knowing that Dr. Gaul is not someone who's very forgiving. She made it clear that she does not like liars and she does not like traitors. So to me, it makes no sense that you would believe that Dr. Gaul wouldn't execute Sejanus. That whole thing doesn't make sense to me, so I don't, yeah, that's something also that bothered me a little bit. At the end, he also poisoned Highbottom, who was always very antagonistic towards Snow, and Snow didn't really understand why. We learn at the end it's because of his dad, because he and his dad were very good friends, and they were assigned a project to find a punishment for the district that would be bad enough that they would never rebel against the capital again. And so while they were drunk, Highbottom told Snow's dad about this idea that he had, which was the Hunger Games. Snow purposefully made Highbottom drink more so that he would keep going on about his plan, and he told him that he wouldn't tell anyone, that it was just like a drunken joke. But then the next day he actually went to see Dr. Gaul and submitted the proposal to her, which she accepted and was made into the Hunger Games. And so Highbottom feels very guilty about that, because he's essentially responsible for the Hunger Games, even though he never actually meant for it to become a thing. So that is why he hates Snow's dad, and because Snow is so similar to his dad, he immediately hates him because of it. So we learned that. And so at the end of this conversation, Snow poisoned Highbottom, which also signifies the birth of Snow as we know him in the Hunger Games, because we also know that poisoning his opponents is something that he does regularly. So the fact that Highbottom is the first person that he poisoned is significant of the birth of President Snow. But again, I found this scene a bit jarring, because earlier with Lucy Gray, he tells her that he's done killing people, that three people killed is enough for him. So the fact that he has, again, no remorse killing Highbottom, and that it's apparently the first of many more that he will kill later on, I found it a bit rushed. Also, that whole sequence at the end, after he comes back to the capital, was so disappointing, because we essentially see Snow become the man that he is in the Hunger Games through a montage. All of the things that happen after he comes back to the capital, we see as a succession of events. We don't even see them, we just hear Snow narrates them in a very cold and emotionless manner. He basically just says, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened, and we get no insight on it. We get no development on it, which is very disappointing, because the whole point of the book is to see his origin story, is to see how he became the man that he became. So at the end, we essentially see him becoming the man that he became through a sequence of events with no insight and in just a couple pages. We saw him throughout the book be a pretty consistent character and not change much. And then at the end, he just, like I said, in the last 10%, we see him essentially become the way that he was in the Hunger Games. And it was just very disappointing. Again, like I already said, I would have liked a more gradual thing. And after such a promising beginning, and with such interesting ideas, with all the different characters that have the power to influence Snow and where his character will go, to have the payoff be this rushed was just very disappointing. I don't know. And I'm someone who really cares about endings, so I feel like that's why it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth in the end, even though I feel like the book was pretty good overall. But yeah, that whole last bit I just was very disappointed by, and yeah, it's just such a letdown, because it could have been so much better. So yes, these were my thoughts about this book. So I hope you liked this video, no matter how long it is. If you are still here, thank you, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.